this should be fun, particularly if it becomes interactive. I volunteer for these things. I have to say. Well, we got an hour and a half, and people can drop off, and if the poor, unfortunate souls who aren't on now can join later, and hopefully they'll miss something. My guess is when I got involved in Aston, a good percentage of the group were still getting a DB5 James Bond car out of a paper box, which is kind of where my interest started.
Yep.
And I never expected to go on much beyond that. No, it was actually, it's a little different. It wasn't even yeah, no, she basically, I'd already ended up in a bunch of odd things. I mean, I started a chicken farm in Iran when I was 23 because I took a course in the law school and I was getting a doctorate at Columbia, and one course, and it was on public law 480, which was uh, food for peace.
Mm-hmm.
And as a joke, I put a sample application to start a chicken farm in Iran. And as a joke, I sent it to AID. And the guy who read the mail was went on to be the head of banking for Morgan Guarantee. And I got an A in the course, and they sent me a check for $260,000, which was then about $2 million. And I decided, well, I've never been to Iran. I don't speak Farsi. I've never seen a chicken I wasn't about to eat. So I'm ideal. So we went and did it. So I had sort of a reputation in the family for doing the ridiculous and the impossible. And I was sitting in the bathtub reading the New York Times, and it was announced that Walter Cronkite had done an obituary for Aston Martin wearing a black suit and a black tie. And nobody could remember him doing that for a human being. And I came down grumbling, well, why did that have to happen? And my wife gets very irritated with my grumbling, so she said, well, why don't you go do something about it? Yeah. And this was Friday, and a friend of mine who knew me fairly well, Jan Dowman, who for a short time, for £1, owned Aston Martin 1975 Limited. She called the Dorchester to see whether I'd arrived. And then the rest is covered exactly according to that story. I had no intention of doing anything serious. I was just curious. And if you've read the story, there really was they sent a car to pick me up. It was in the hands of the receiver. And there was a scrum of 15 or 20 news people. There must have been nothing happening that day in the UK. And I realized I was already in trouble, and that's when they asked me, well, who are you? And I said, well, I'm not anybody. Well, if that isn't the best PR you can get in Britain, I don't know what it is. I was now a mystery person. And then they wrote the headline, Millionaire to the Rescue. I don't think at the time I had $1 million in dollars, but I was in pretty good shape in yen and pesetas. And obviously, if you've been on the front page of newspapers in England, somebody's going to figure out who you are. And so I was caught, and I decided that the only way I could look respectable, rather than just somebody who was coming over to get some headlines, was I might as well stick around and find out why it couldn't be done. And one of the ways the receivers saved money for Mr. Wilson was he kept no heat in the stove in the headquarters building, where I spent a good deal of time getting cold and getting pissed off. And I never could find a good reason why it couldn't be done. I also didn't have any particularly good reasons as to why it could be done. I mean, the concept of having a business plan with numbers going out 5 years. I've never seen a business plan that was worth a damn anyway. The basic plan is how you stay in business for the next 90 days, God willing.
Yeah.
No, what I ended up acquiring, and the first thing that I did, because as it turns out, I was the only American ever involved in the 5 years. George Minden is credited with having been there at the closing, but he wasn't. George is a perfectly nice guy, but his wife wanted to live in Switzerland, and she didn't want to get too involved. We had one time when he came down, and we were arguing over the design of the Lagonda, and he wanted a hood ornament, which obviously made a good deal of sense because it tells you where the front of your car is. But from the point of view of William Towns, that didn't make any sense. It would have spoiled the front. I had one good chance to make a great investment in England. Somebody offered me 600 different hood ornaments for 10,000. I think it was £6,000, and that would have been a collection. But then again, one of the reasons I didn't want to do it is I was going to deprive some restoration project of a genuine hood ornament. Anyway, we don't have a hood ornament, and I think the reason the Lagonda came out so well is that it wasn't designed by a committee. Most things that are designed like a committee look like a camel. It's once been described as a horse designed by a committee.
Yeah.
The decision to build it took less than a day. William Towns came as a drawing. I said, "Oh my God, that's beautiful." Things I have to say, when people bought the Lagonda, I wrote every Lagonda owner and sent them my home phone number and said, "If you had any problems, please call." And it was a 24-hour. It was one of those phones that came in black with Bakelite. You picked up like that. They didn't have any problems, but nobody actually bothered to call. And it may be an understanding that no matter what I had, including a flat tire, I wasn't going to be of much help. So we'd been told by the people in Beverly Hills that we had to have a convertible. Somewhere along the line, engineering told us they couldn't build a convertible. And somewhere along the line, Alan Curtis, who, thank God, joined me practically 3 days after I got there, and deserves an incredible amount of credit for everything that happened. Just as a sideline, he drove to work in a Woody Miner, a dilapidated Woody Miner. Alan was basically a pilot. I don't think he gave a hoot about automobiles. And eventually he built the Bulldog, and Aston built the nose cone for the Bulldog. But anyway, Alan Curtis was there, and back on. And he ran into a guy that's in the book, and now I'm drawing a blank, but he was a designer for previous Astons. And he said, "I could make the top for £6,000. So he designed it, and it had oak parts. And oak turns out to be a very good material if you're making a limited production. Morgan knows something about this. Doesn't rust, doesn't break. You don't have to make a whole special set of tools. You do have to reinforce the subframe a little bit because you lose some of the structural integrity of the car. So he did both. And it was 17 guys, and they just set out to build it. And when we rolled it out, there's a wonderful picture of the whole workforce. They built it. I mean, they rolled out the design, and the workforce built it. They could have built anything. I mean, what wasn't on the balance sheet of Aston Martin was the 50 years or 100 years of history going back to hearses and what have you. It was what was in people's heads and hearts and their hands. And that doesn't show up on a balance sheet as an asset. But my biggest contribution was, frankly, I was optimistic. I didn't know why it couldn't be done. And frankly, one of my other big advantages, I didn't have an Oxbridge accent. So they actually, after a while, kind of began to trust me because they'd never had an American lie to them. That's primarily because they hadn't met very many Americans. I mean, I love the fact that I actually got up on this little 6-inch soapbox and I said, this company's been bankrupt, I think, 5 times. And in fact, in 1975, we were completely bankrupt. What I bought was the assets, not the company. So we got to drop the 1975 5 years later. And I said, guys, we're going to go bankrupt again for sure in about a year. If you don't tell us what we're doing, that's stupid. And out of that, we got more than 2,000 change orders. Innovation rarely comes out of big organizations. They're built on seniority. I think General Electric had a 20-member board, and there was a unseen line down the middle of the table that represented, and the 10 senior directors sat on one end, and or as people died off, you got to move towards the line, and you were basically told you weren't supposed to do anything until you got over the line, which usually took about 10 years. And so if you look, there's a book called The Innovators, which is fascinating, but the development of the personal computer and the internet and everything else was done by 28 to 30-year-old kids who were high on drugs against the war in Vietnam. They had a hackers group. I think there was something like a grassroots computer club. And it was Jobs and the people at Xerox PARC who were left alone by Xerox, where the mouse was developed in mahogany, of all things. And but innovation comes from the bottom. Having been there for 20, 30 years, you go to a meeting, and particularly in high tech, the person who may know the most about the subject is probably a 24-year-old kid who's still at Stanford, not your chief technology officer. I realize I'm making a stretch between Aston and this, but the older I get, the less appreciation I have for the theoretical omniscience of a board. And in fact, I don't think boards should ever consist of more than 5 people.